Okay, let's start with a pretty wild idea. What if every time someone took out a loan, they were actually settling the debt in that exact same moment? I know, it sounds completely impossible, but there's this strange and persistent legal theory that argues it's true, and it all goes back to a law passed almost 100 years ago. So today, we're going to unpack it.
It just sounds totally backward, right? I mean, we all know a loan creates a debt, an obligation you have to pay off over years. But this theory, it flips that whole idea completely on its head. It says that the very act of you signing your name in that promissory note, the piece of paper that's supposed to create your debt, is what actually gets rid of it. It's a crazy concept, so let's dig into where it even comes from. Now, this whole argument isn't just some random thought experiment. The people who push this theory claim it's all grounded in a real, specific piece of legislation. And to understand it, we've got to go way back in time, back to one of the biggest economic meltdowns in history, the Great Depression. Right, so our story really kicks off in 1933. It was a time of total financial chaos, and it forced the US government to take some pretty extreme measures. So look at how this played out. In 1933, FDR declares this national banking emergency. Congress jumps in and passes the Emergency Banking Act to make it all official. Now you'd think, okay, that emergency ended decades ago, right? Well, here's the crazy part. A Senate investigation in 1976 looked into it and they found that the original proclamation was, and this is their word, still extant, meaning legally it never actually ended. And this is the absolute key. The law itself has a very specific off switch built into it. It says these emergency rules are in place until the president officially declares that the emergency has terminated. According to the theory, because no president has ever issued that specific proclamation for the 1933 banking emergency, that switch has never, ever been flipped. That one word from the Senate report, extant, is everything here. It doesn't just mean it's old. It means it's still legally alive and kicking. It's the very foundation this entire theory is built on. So let's just connect the dots. The big takeaway from all this history is, if that emergency is still legally active, then the rules and the financial machinery created by that Emergency Banking Act are also, in theory, still in play today. And this is what sets the stage for a totally different way of looking at how money and loans are supposed to work. So if this 1933 legal framework is still humming along in the background, what does that actually mean for you? According to this theory, what's really happening when you sign on the dotted line for a mortgage or a car loan? Well, the answer might just blow your mind. On the left, that's what we all think happens, right? You borrow money, your signature is a promise to pay it back. Super simple. But the theory we're looking at over on the right suggests something completely different. It claims your signature doesn't just promise future value, it actually creates value right then and there. Your promissory note isn't just proof of a debt, it's a valuable financial asset, a security. Okay, so this slide maps out the supposed secret journey of your signature. Step 1, you sign the note at the bank. Then, according to this theory, the bank deposits your note with the Federal Reserve. The Fed then takes it and uses it as collateral with the US Treasury. And here's the final, most important step. The Treasury is then authorized to issue brand new currency, new Federal Reserve notes equal to the value of your note. The claim here is huge. You're not being loaned existing money. Your signature is the very thing that creates the new money. And proponents of this theory, they point straight to the 1933 congressional record as their proof. I mean, look at the wording here. Money is issued in return for these notes. The document is worth 100 cents on the dollar because it's backed by the credit of the nation. They argue this language describes an equal exchange of value, not a loan where you owe something back. And this brings us to the absolute core of the legal argument. See, for this whole theory to hold up, a promissory note has to stop being just a simple IOU and legally become something else entirely, a security. The way they claim this happens is through a legal idea called rebuttable presumption. Basically, it means that the idea that your note is a loan is just the default assumption. It's what everyone takes for granted. But it's an assumption that can be challenged and even overturned if you have enough evidence to the contrary. So, if the whole loan idea is just an assumption, what evidence could possibly be strong enough to flip it? Well, the theory claims you don't have to go digging for some hidden loophole. The proof, it argues, is written right into the text of the Emergency Banking Act itself. So, the Act lists out a very specific group of financial instruments that are allowed to be deposited as security. Notice the language. Any notes,
drafts, bills of exchange, or bankers' acceptances. Proponents call this the Congressional Family Resemblance Test. Their argument is that by putting promissory notes in the same bucket as these other well-known securities, Congress was legally defining them all as being in the same class, at least in this context. And that right there is the linchpin of the legal claim. It's not some modern-day court reinterpreting things. The theory says this is a direct classification made by Congress way back in 1933. If Congress puts notes in a list of securities that can be swapped for cash, then, within the world of that law, a note is a security. Period. Whoa, okay, that was a lot, right? We've gone from the Great Depression to the legal definition of a security. Let's just take a second, pull it all together, and recap what this wild theory is actually saying. So it really boils down to these four pillars. First, that 1933 emergency law, still active. Second, under that law, your promissory note is legally considered a security, an asset. Third, that security is exchanged at par, which just means dollar for new currency. And finally, the bombshell conclusion. If it's an equal exchange of value for value, then there is no debt. The obligation, this theory argues, is settled the moment you sign your name. And get this isn't just about one obscure banking law from the 30s. That same Senate report from the 70s that found the emergency was still extant, it also found 470 other federal laws that are all triggered by these ongoing states of emergency. It points to this huge, almost invisible legal framework operating just beneath the surface, granting all sorts of extraordinary powers. And that really brings us to the final, unavoidable question. The claims we've walked through today are based on a very specific, very detailed reading of laws that are, according to these sources, still on the books. So if this interpretation of the legal and historical record is even remotely plausible, why isn't it part of our everyday understanding of money? Why does it feel so far outside of how we think our entire financial system works? Now that is the real mystery. Thanks for tuning in.